Okay, I think we might be starting. We'll let kind of people come in as we go. Apologies, and I was warned about this. I cannot see the audience at all now, but there we go, a little bit lower. I can see them a bit more. But we're going to try and make this session as interactive as possible. We've got a couple of presentations to go through and then kind of open up to audience questions. So hopefully you've thought of some already, having seen the title of this talk, and then also we'll have many as you listen to the presentations. So just to introduce myself, so my name is Emily Wheeler. I am Director of Research, Partnerships and Development at MQ Mental Health Research. We're a leading global mental health research charity, and it is such an honor to be here chairing this session today with a couple of different hats on, so both in my role at MQ, but also as someone with lived experience of anxiety and depression, and as such, a co-chair of the triangulation stuff that we do at Galenos, so just a small part of a much larger whole. So it's really, really exciting to be able to be here today. I also felt in a room of neurologists, I would be able to say this, I'm also a chronic migraine sufferer, had one last night in a bit of the post-drone phase, so I apologize if I am falling over my words slightly. Hopefully seems to be okay so far. And obviously there is so much link there with the mental health side as well. So today we are going to hear from Professor Andrea Cipriani, who is Professor Psychiatrist at the University of Oxford. And then on the screen, hopefully, we should have Tate, who will be joining us. So Tate is chair of the Galenos Global Living Experiential Advisory Board. So essentially the board that looks after the lived experience as part of the Galenos project. I'm not going to say too much more in terms of the project itself, because that's why we have Andrea here today to explain that to us. And then we're going to dive into some questions to really think about how does lived experience play a role in such a complex project and what we've been learning as well. So we're going to be really open and honest with you, what we found through the process, what's working, what's not working, and hopefully that means you'll leave with some really useful, very practical advice to take forward into your own work and how lived experience really can be an important part of such complex neuroscience. So I think over to you for now, Andrea.
Oh, sure.
Can we get some slides, I think, up on the screen?
Yes.
Perfect.
I'll move here. I think. Hello, nice to meet you. So I'm Andrea Cipriani. As Emily said, I'm based in Oxford, and I'm the director of Galenos, which is the project that we present today as a case study or an example of fruitful collaboration between a multidisciplinary team of experts, including experts with lived experience. I'm a clinical academic, so I see people in the clinic mainly with mood disorders, and I'm a psychiatrist. But one of the key things that we try to do is in order to improve the treatments that we offer to our patients, we want to use what we call an evidence-based approach. And evidence synthesis has been around for 30+ years now as the paradigmatic example of what we call evidence-based medicine, so being informed in our clinical decision-making by the best available evidence. And I'd like to present this project because we try really to do something different, like looking backwards in order to be able to do something better forward. Galenos is an acronym. I really hope that Tate can hear and listen to the presentation, because it is supposed to be very interactive also among the speakers. Anyway, so Galenos is an acronym, and it stands for Global Alliance for Living Evidence on Anxiety, Depression, and Psychosis. This was a program of research launched by Wellcome a couple of years ago, because mental health is one of the priorities for Wellcome. At the same time, I really like the vision of Wellcome, which is to funnel resources according to priorities. And in mental health, anxiety, depression, and psychosis cover the great majority of the people we see in the clinic. There are other disorders that are equally important, but in order to do something tangible, concrete and material, I think it's always good to start with what we think should be addressed first. So the Galenos' aim is to summarize in a living mode the existing evidence about these three areas of mental health, working with a multidisciplinary group, the Alliance, at the global level, because mental health is not only a problem in specific area of the world, but at the same time it means collecting and hearing the voices of people from very different backgrounds. And this is where we started discussing the contribution of people with lived experience. Lived experience is not only the lived experience first person of the mental health issues, is also practicing as a clinician in this kind of different settings. The problem we tried to address is a huge problem we have in medicine. I think psychiatry is, unfortunately, a very good example of being late to the game and be a sort of Cinderella. We can discuss during the Q&A, but mental health and psychiatry in general, psychology if you want, is always difficult to picture within the medical sciences division. Is it science? Is it not just biology? Of course, the biopsychosocial model is crucial, but the reality is that even in psychiatry, as in many other fields of medicine, over the last few years, the number of publications has grown exponentially. And on one hand, this means more data to inform our clinical decision-making in real-world practice, but at the same time is problematic because it's difficult to keep up with the latest information. It is also very difficult to navigate because the landscape is very fragmented. It's difficult to identify, especially for busy clinicians, to identify what is the reference in terms of publication that can really help and inform the clinical judgment. And there's another big problem highlighted a few years ago in a very nice series in The Lancet about the waste in research, which is a very important problem for funders because you want to improve what is the outcome of the patients. We are dealing with limited resources, and the research production is always a great example of research waste because there's no coordination, there's duplication of something that it is not necessarily to be studied because it is already known and so on. So in order to tackle this problem, which is, as I said, generic and broad for medicine, but the case study today is mental health, the idea is to use evidence synthesis to foster innovation in mental health. This is what, I'm not, of course, young, but I like to talk to a young audience. The idea of evidence synthesis 2.0 is using a paradigm that we know works because we need to base our decision-making in the clinical setting. We need to base it on evidence, but at the same time, we need to change how we do this. And it is not our idea, it was Wellcome's idea that looking at the existing evidence, identifying the gaps, and understanding the mechanisms can really help define the research trajectory over time in the future, especially because the most important thing is to define the research priorities. And this is where, of course, the lived experience is crucial. So the vision is relatively simple, which is we want to collect the best science. I'm very happy to be challenged about the meaning of best science, because that's the methodological component that we are trying to develop in Galenos, because it's not easy to assess the quality of the evidence. But however, let's call it best science. And the other important part of the vision is we don't want to have this compartmentalized and fragmented approach. So as we heard this morning during the plenary session, the normal trajectory is animal studies, then you move to phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. So it's like a series of events. But actually, if we are testing, for instance, interventions, we would like to combine the data from human and non-human animal studies or in vitro studies. Because in the end, if our aim is to distinguish signal from noise, any type of data can be informative. So our job is to make sense of all this evidence, but looking at this in a parallel way, so contemporary, is helping increasing the power of the analysis. And the third component is we look at all this because we want to understand what happens. We want to understand the mechanism. It's not simply describing what is the effect size or whatever it is, or stratifying the population. It's more understanding what works and what doesn't, because if something works, we can then take this forward and invest in terms of research priority. If it doesn't, we can stop early. And of course, it's crucial to have this in a sort of virtual circle, and that's the living nature of the evidence, so continuously updated. The other point is innovative methods. I just mentioned the critical appraisal of the evidence, or what we call the certainty of evidence. At the same time, it's important to innovate the methodology, because it's not only moving away from the statistical significance, which is something we should clearly abandon as a concept. It's also find innovative ways to, for instance, identify mediators of effect, or incorporating new studies. I'll give you some examples in a minute. Depending on the clinical question, how can we combine different study design and so on. And part of the innovative method that Giorgia Salanti yesterday explained as part of the triangulation, I'll come back to this in a second, we also want to include AI. AI not only because summarizing thousands of papers, having machine learning and AI helping really helps in terms of reducing the time, especially when we go in the living mode for the review, but also because if we use AI in a clever way, we can get information that we don't usually get from the manual work. And an example that I can cite now is using the huge amount of data we have already collected, we developed a tool to predict what are the trendy topics over the future. And we had a great case study, which is COVID, which was unexpected, apparently. But now we use this approach in a creative way, trying to act early and help and inform clinical practice. The third point is truly global. Yes, the world has to go global. For us, global is the global south, and really hope that Tate can spend a few words about this, because it's enriching the perspective if you really are global. I know it's not very popular now to say global, especially in some countries on the other side of the pond, but it's our vocation is to really, truly global. And part of it is a real co-production. When I say a real co-production, I mean working with people with lived experience at all levels of the project, and not only when we design the proposal, and Emily, and at that time, Lee Mulligan also were instrumental to make this happen, but also in the process of Galenos, when we do the evidence synthesis exercise, from evidence collection to the synthesis itself, when we have to identify the gaps in the analysis of the findings, when we work in terms of prioritization, then translation and dissemination of the findings. And just to bookend the process, in Galenos, when we start with a specific research question, the specific research question in psychosis, anxiety, and depression is defined by PPI. And at the end of the process, when we have the results, and we need to tell funders, okay, these are the research priorities. Again, this work is led by people with lived experience. So we really want this exercise to be meaningful for people who are the end users of what we try to do. I think for people who attended Georgia Salanti's talk yesterday, this is probably familiar, is just to show the process and the key component. I mentioned the human studies, I mentioned the animal studies, and again, it's interesting because we were discussing the methodological improvement. I'm a human study expert, if you want, because I treat patients, but it was really enlightening to discuss with the animal experts, because as a clinician, as a clinical academic, every time I do a meta-analysis, I really worry about heterogeneity. The moment you talk to the animal expert, they say, we love heterogeneity, because you can really understand the dose effect. So it's also sharing vision and different views among researchers that is important. And what is the best way to do this? The best way is to triangulate the evidence. Triangulation is something that has been done many years ago in social sciences, for instance, but that's the first time we do in epidemiology. Triangulation is based on one assumption, which is each piece of evidence has its own bias. We know that this data are biased because of, for instance, the selection of the population, the other maybe the study design and so on. So the overarching idea is we can combine different pieces of evidence with different types of bias in order to nullify, if you want, or contrast the intrinsic bias and produce new, more robust data. And we use triangulation at two levels. One is to really tell the living system, the living review, shall we go ahead or stop here? Because the moment we triangulate animal data and human data, we can really understand whether this new treatment is working or not. And if there's no signal, there's no point in investing in this resource. Or the other thing is the opposite. There may be something promising about this research, and this should continue. The second point about the triangulation is based on the leadership of the people with lived experience. It is the triangulation which is producing the prioritization exercise. So we base our recommendation about future research after the triangulation, which is a very complex process involving a face-to-face meeting and an analysis of the data, and at the same time, as I hope Tate will describe, having been involved in this kind of exercise, it's important to be trained around triangulation. The U of the HATU is the living system. We need to update the evidence, and this is also where AI can help. So the triangulation, as I said, is an important thing, but when we discuss also how we can go ahead with Galenos, how we can build on our experience, we realize that we focus a lot on the methodological part, we know what we do, but one key element which is missing is training the clinicians and the people doing, or neuroscientists, doing this in order to understand what triangulation is. Because otherwise, the risk is to look at this data without the required critical angle that is needed. So it's not just adding together two simple pieces of evidence, it's contextualizing these in a more complex paradigm. And again, I throw this to the audience. I hope somebody will ask some questions during the Q&A. That's a sort of slide that Georgia showed yesterday about how we see this visually is like a machine producing all this data digested by lived experience and then producing the research prioritization that I said. We have a website, and the other thing that I like to tell to this audience is that how we described initially and how we set up Galenos is a two-way, is a bottom-up and a top-down approach. So we have a group, a global group of researchers, but at the same time, we would like to expand this group. We have an international advisory board where experts in the field give us ideas, and then these ideas are discussed by the lived experience experts, and then we identify the starting point, which is the research questions. So you're more than welcome to contact us, and we are looking for expanding this collaboration at institutional or personal level. And that's the bottom up. The top down is talking to funders, because I really think that Galenos can become a machine of evidence, and we have some great examples working closely with Wellcome. We received some prompts about what could this be a topic of interest. We are working now discussing something about young people and use of internet in relation to developing mental health issues, which is a very important topic. It was not selected by the lived experience experts we had in the bottom up. It's a top down, but this is exactly the kind of collaboration we want, because I think, I'm biased about Galenos, but I think this is the way forward, because actually Galenos is a literature-based discovery science in mental health. This is not my statement, Niles, but I think it captures exactly what is the USP, the unique selling point of Galenos. So we have put together all this, and now we are ready to use it. It is discovery science, is informed on existing top-notch literature, and this will improve the outcome of people with mental health issues. I'll stop here. And
thank you. If we're able to, I think to go straight over to Tate, and then we'll do questions after that from the audience. Are we able to bring, there we go. Hi, Tate. Great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. Fab. So Tate, I don't know if you've heard the beginning. We did a very quick kind of introduction in terms of just yourself and Andrea, but I'd love to pass over to you to do your presentation, please.
Sure, thank you so much, Emily. Let me just share my screen and I'll get started. Okay, great. So a pleasant afternoon to everyone. I'm really excited to be speaking with you today about something that's very close to the work that we're doing within the Galenos project, and that is the role of co-production. So my name is Tate, and I am the chair of the Global Experiential Advisory Board that works within Galenos. And, you know, as Andrea mentioned earlier, I think I too have become biased when it comes to Galenos, but honestly within good reason, because I've really seen how the project has evolved in terms of having co-production being central to the work that's being done, both on the research side and on lived experience expertise as well. So yeah, let's get right into it. So we've been experiencing this growing wave of interest in embedding co-production into mental health research and mental health work. And it's becoming more common to hear about the importance of having, of including people with lived experience in research and service delivery. But what does that actually look like in practice? You know, because if we're being honest, there's often a gap between the theory of co-production and the reality of actually doing it well. And, you know, with this in mind, I think you're probably wondering, so what has given us the confidence as the team that's working on the Galenos project to come and share with you the kind of work that we're doing? And that's exactly what I'm going to be unpacking for you today in terms of how Galenos has not just been talking the talk, but actually working on building co-production and embedding it into the DNA of the project. So just briefly, what is co-production? So co-production is a collaborative approach in which individuals with lived experience of mental health issues work alongside researchers, professionals, and policymakers. And it ensures that research is not just done about people, but with and for them. But co-production can be very complex because it also means different things in different contexts. And over the next few slides, we're going to see the kind of approach that Galenos has taken to ensure that it is meaningful and effective. So why is co-production important? Co-production is important because it empowers people with lived experience. It helps us understand the needs of those with lived experience, and also helps us to prioritize important topics for research. And one thing that I have seen working as a lived experience advisor on this project is that co-production isn't about having one voice louder than the other. It's not about putting research above lived experience or putting lived experience above research, but it's about having that power sharing being embedded inside the project. Because if you have one voice dominating, you lose the very essence of what co-production is meant to achieve. Co-production is very powerful when different perspectives, the professional, the academic, the lived experience, the research, all of that are speaking to the same objective. So you have lived experience bringing in real world insight, and then we have researchers providing structure and scholarly depth. And together we create research that's not only valid, but that is actually useful. And that's exactly the value of having experiential advisors involved in every phase of the project, which is something that Galenos has done right from the beginning up until the end. As Andrea explained, people with lived experience are involved throughout every phase of the project. And this has also helped in actually having a deeper appreciation of the role that either the researchers play or the lived experience advisors play, because it becomes less about whose input matters more and more about how each and every contribution strengthens outcome of the project. So how has Galenos done this? Through the Global Experiential Advisory Board. So just to introduce you to the Global Experiential Advisory Board, it is a board that is made up of mental health activists, campaigners from all around the world. And this is the team. I really have to mention the team because without their contributions, I wouldn't be able to speak of anything of the work that we are doing today. So we have people from the Philippines, from Canada, from Nigeria, from India, and myself from Zimbabwe, and from Indonesia as well. And a special mention to Manvi, who was with us until December 2023, an incredible asset to the team. Even though she's no longer with us, her impact still remains. So this is also one interesting aspect of the Galenos project in terms of having lived experience at a global kind of scale, because having a global board means that we're not just hearing one story, but we have a rich mix of different perspectives that are shaped by different cultures, different healthcare systems, and social norms. So we're working with so many different mental health realities. Things like how mental health stigma looks very different in Zimbabwe than it does in Canada. Access to mental health services in Nigeria may not necessarily be the same as they are in Indonesia. And even definitions of mental health itself vary across different cultures. So this diversity is definitely challenging, but it's also what makes the project so valuable and why we have such a rich contribution from lived experience expertise, because Galenos is not just trying to improve mental health outcomes in one place, but it's building a model that works across different systems and across different social settings. So how does co-production work within Galenos? Co-production within Galenos is a very active collaborative process which works throughout all the stages. So these three, the design, implementation, and evaluation, are just an overview of just how it operates. So I'll just explain briefly for each phase. So at the design stage, we have experiential advisors involved in setting the foundation. So we help identify the key research questions, ensuring that the focus is not just on what's academically interesting, but on what's actually meaningful to the people that are affected by these issues. And then we move on to implementation. During implementation, the GLEAB members provide ongoing strategic input. So this means guiding the research in a direction that keeps the process grounded in lived experience. So for example, we help identify gaps in evidence and make sure that the findings reflect the realities on the ground and not just theoretical outcomes. And then finally, the evaluation stage is where things really come full circle. So the GLEAB helps prioritize the findings based on both research strength and real-world relevance. So this final step ensures that the recommendations that come out of the project are not just scientifically valid, but they are practical and actionable for the communities that they aim to serve. And this is a more in-depth kind of overview of where each and every, where the lived experience advisors are involved in the project and at which phase. So you can see right from the beginning, at the first stage, which is the selection of the living systematic reviews. This is where the GLEAP helps to decide which research questions to focus on, using 3 key criteria. That is it equitable? Is it viable? Is it impactful? And these 3 criteria were also chosen by the lived experience advisors themselves. So when it comes to equitability, you ask questions like, does this reflect the needs of diverse communities? Viability is about asking, can this realistically be explored with the resources that are available? And being impactful, we look at asking or answering this question, make a real difference in mental health care or understanding. And this was actually one of the very first tasks that the GLEAP tackled, and it really shaped how the project then unfolded. And then we have the second stage, which is the living systematic reviews. So once the questions are selected, we have 2 GLEAP members that sit on the review panel to guide the research direction. So we make sure that the process stays grounded in real-world needs and doesn't drift into purely academic territory. So what's key here is that each advisor focuses on the area that is most relevant to their personal experience. So remember, we have a global experiential advisory board of people with varied experiences of either depression, anxiety, and psychosis. So you are placed where you can contribute the most to the condition that really speaks to what you have experienced. So if someone has lived with depression, they naturally focus more on research related to depression rather than psychosis or anxiety. So this also ensures that the work that we're doing is also personally relevant to the people who are working within the GLEAB throughout the project. And then we have the third stage, which is the triangulation of evidence. Now, this part has probably been the most challenging aspect of the project to navigate. And triangulation is where we assess evidence from both human and animal studies to kind of figure out what research is really telling us. And some of the conclusions that we come up with are that some findings are clear and actionable, others are promising but need more work, and some are just dead ends. So what really helped shape this process was actually co-producing the methodology itself. So the first time around, we had our first triangulation meeting. I think it was a huge learning curve for everyone within the room, not just on the lived experience side, but on the researcher's side as well. And so what we then did the second time around is that we introduced a co-chair role, which is currently being occupied by Emily Wheeler, an excellent co-chair, specifically to help moderate the scientific discussions. So the co-chair acts as a bridge between the research and the lived experience perspectives. And this ensures that lived experience advisors remain part of the process even when the conversations get heavy with scientific jargon. And this has also helped keep the process balanced and inclusive rather than letting scientific voices dominate the room. And honestly, this has been a game changer for us because instead of having lived experience feeling like an add-on, it has become embedded in how the research is interpreted and applied. And then the final stage is prioritization. Once the evidence has been reviewed, it is then time to decide what to focus on next. So the GLEAB, or we also have people from an experiential advisory bank that we have that also come on various aspects of the project where needed, help to refine and prioritize the research questions. So this step allows us to translate the evidence into practical recommendations. And because the GLEAB has been involved right from the beginning, the priorities we set reflect both scientific strength and real-world relevance. And honestly, when looking back at how co-production has really evolved within this project, it's really a hit or miss process sometimes, but that's the nature of genuine collaboration. You know, when you're trying to push the boundaries, not everything sticks the first time, but the wins are definitely worth it. And that's something I think we can all testify to in terms of how we have seen PPI involvement within the project. So finally, a final thought is that, co-production is not neat. It's a very messy process. It's uncomfortable, and sometimes it does get frustrating. I'll be very honest about that. But that's really the beauty and the price of doing it right. And that's really the whole point. Because when you let or allow lived experience lead alongside research, the outcome isn't just more accurate, it becomes more person-centered. And just one thing to mention as well before I round off my presentation is that I'd also like to give credit to the researchers, the professionals, the academics that have also been working with us on this project. From being involved in leadership meetings and the different tasks that we have carried out, I can safely say that within the Galenos project, I've realized that it's not that researchers are trying to be exclusive in their approach to co-production. It's more like, breaking into a new pair of shoes. The first few times you wear the shoes, they're a bit tight, they're a bit uncomfortable. But the more you wear them, the more comfy the fit becomes. And I think this is kind of how we have seen co-production, playing out within the project with the researchers, with all the meetings that we've had, the discussions, the readjusting, and just going back to the drawing board to see how we can change the methodology that we have come up with. So I hope that shed some light on our approach in terms of co-production, and maybe also inspire you to reflect on how the Galenos methodology could shape your own approach to mental health research moving forward. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Tate. That was really, really helpful. And I think just hopefully gives the audience a bit of an idea of kind of how, you're planning for things to be involved, how they start to look like in reality. And it's just so wonderful to hear that feedback from Tate in terms of it feeling like a real kind of, an actual example of co-production. Through these questions, and I'm going to start off with a couple, but then really would like to open up to the rest of the room and can now see you a bit better. So we'll be hopefully pointing some roving mics that will come out shortly. One thing I want to make sure is, as I said at the beginning, we are very open and honest about this. And I think both Tate and Andrea in their presentations have said, we're figuring this out as well. We are practicing, we are learning as we're going, and we're hopefully therefore sharing those learnings with others so that others can not have to start from scratch and square one. They can learn from what we've done and what we've been able to figure out and try that out too. So hopefully through this discussion, as I say, it'll be something in a very kind of open learning approach. The other thing I want to say is to say thank you to Welcome for both obviously enabling this plenary session to happen, but obviously being our partner in that learning. And it is a wonderful thing, both being a funder ourselves at MQ as well, to be able to work with organisations that appreciate we haven't got all the answers, and our best laid plans may have looked wonderful at the beginning, but when you put them into reality, what does that look like? And giving us the space to be able to actually try new things out and say, you know what, that didn't work as well as it could have done. Let's try a new way and let's share that learning. So another huge thank you as well to them for being that learning partner with us and enabling this today. So my first question, I think, Andrea, to kind of almost take us back to the beginning is, what made you want to include lived experience in this? And I say this very much from working with academics across the field, it's still, I will say, a bit hit and miss in terms of whether people see the value of lived experience, whether they've even had an experience of working with lived experience. So it does take academics like yourself to say, this is important, we should have it here. But what was it that made you think about that and kind of bring it into reality, I guess?
So I think nowadays it's impossible to do any piece of research, any project without involving people with lived experience. What I liked of the challenge of Galenos was to try to do something different in terms of co-production. I think Tate summarized perfectly what we tried to do, which was not only list all the different steps and try to work together how the input from people with lived experience can be meaningful and substantial. But it's also personal. I really like the last slide. It is something that, and that's the beauty of this global project. So meeting and together and understanding from each other what are the priority or the many things that didn't work at the beginning. We had enough time to change things while we were doing. And in that sense, I say the personal thing, because for me as a researcher, I didn't appreciate what Tate reported, which was how difficult it is for someone with lived experience to be vocal, to be able to say something. And for instance, I remember that was yours idea and also Tate's, when we have the results of the systematic reviews, because then the aim is to meet at the triangulation meeting. As Tate said, it is very intimidating, so we had the co-chair idea to facilitate the discussion during the triangulation meeting. But at the same time, correct me if I'm wrong, Tate, we have 1 or 2 meetings where I meet with the lived experience expert people to digest all this information and create the space to raise any question, any doubts. And this really helps also for me when I'm writing the paper to set the tone of the paper. It is a bi-directional thing that I really like.
Brilliant, thank you. And Tate, I wonder if a question to you is kind of picking up on that theme, as I say, being very open and honest with people in terms of some of the challenges in this area, which you've started to highlight. One I had been thinking about was the piece you said about the really global aspect of this and the challenges that might throw up, particularly as you see within the glebe of that really global group coming together. But also more broadly, if there's any other challenges, again, speaking to the RU in terms of what we found that we may have solved, but also where we're still grappling with those questions.
Yeah, I think, you know, the global nature of us is one of its greatest strengths. And I think from what Andrea mentioned, just trying to speak to what he has mentioned, that one of the things that has also helped us to navigate that is just building relationships. You know, so when you look at co-production and collaboration, one thing that has made that easier, even just to speak up and to share our feedback and to share our insights, is having that relationship, that foundation to get in the first place. So you have debrief meetings, you have briefing meetings before the actual meeting itself, just to assess if we're on the same level of understanding, if there's any language that we need to assess, if there's, you know, just trying to have everyone being on the same page. And building rapport together as a team. It also, I think, it eliminates that idea of working in silos or me having to probably personalize my own perspective and not, you know, try to consider what another lived experience advisor might be sharing. But I think just building relationships across the board, across each and every team, across each and every phase of the project has definitely helped us navigate that challenge.
Thank you. And I think you, through that talk and what your answer just there is starting to highlight that piece of, with projects like this, particularly when they are so complex, you do need the structures and the processes in place. You need the spaces, essentially, which will then allow those relationships to be developed. So it's a mixture of, you can't get away from the fact you do need the structures there, but actually it sounds like the magic happens almost in those spaces where you've built those relationships and how important those really are. And again, I think it speaks to what you were starting to talk about, that power dynamic, which can always be an interesting issue to kind of think about in this space and how you navigate that. I mean, I have many more questions, but opening to the audience, is there anyone who would like to ask a question? And I will try and spot if you've got hands up. There's one, I think, over there, possibly. Oh, can't see at the back. While we're having a look for some more, I might ask.
There's one.
Oh, there we go. Waving hands, kind of in the middle. I can't even see what colour you're wearing, so I can't even say the man in the what colour t-shirt.
Yeah, sorry.
There we go.
She handed the mic to me, so I'm just going to ask. So I've got a couple of questions. I found it really fascinating how you've got... Is that off? I'm not sure. How you've got people across the globe as part of your team. But I was wondering how that kind of translates into evidence synthesis, because one of the biggest limitations that I see in loads of English language systematic reviews, and that's a limitation we report in every single review we do, is that we only looked at English language papers. And obviously, especially with the volume of research that China puts out, that the other countries in the global south put out, how do you navigate that challenge of the language barrier?
Thank you.
Yeah, we don't limit to English paper or publication in English. That's part of the comprehensive search that we run, and that's in collaboration with UCL. And the other thing that we try to do is not only to be comprehensive in terms of including any type of paper, relevant paper in any language, but also we are building a data repository. So all the data are freely available to any researchers in the world in order to, A, replicate the analysis, because we often make mistakes. At the same time, we really endorse open science, and to help people, for instance, like you, if you don't have enough resources to run the search outside the English paper, that's the purpose of Galenos. Just to add a quick comment about involving lived experience in a meaningful way in a systematic review, we use this not only in terms of identifying the primary outcome or secondary outcome in the protocol, but I remember a discussion we had about, after presenting the results, post-hoc sensitivity analysis about specific subpopulation or phases of the disorder. We, as Galenos, we focus a lot on early intervention. We want to identify what works early in the process. But sometimes, I remember especially for one of the reviews about anhedonia in depression, one of the comments from the PPI was exactly to look at a specific subpopulation that was, of course, incorporated.
Brilliant. And Tate, I don't know if you want to answer anything from a language perspective from that lived experience side as well. And again, that's something I think personally we haven't necessarily solved and sorted out, but from your perspective, what does that look like?
Yeah, sure. I think I completely agree, and I think I guess that's also one of the great things about this project is that we do have these questions coming up, and we don't necessarily just name that gap as a problem that is going to be addressed elsewhere or whatever it is, but we actually aim to then address it in the future. So like Andrea mentioned, the first triangulation that we had, I think it was mentioned that we do need to have more research from the global south being represented in some of the meetings. And in the follow-up triangulation meeting, I think that was really needed. That's something that was considered. So I think these questions it's a really great question, and it's very useful for us as well in terms of identifying which gaps we also need to look at moving forward. So yeah, thank you.
Brilliant, thanks Tate. Did you have a second one?
Yes, is that okay?
I think so. There was someone behind you who had a question, but otherwise I haven't seen hands yet.
Sure.
So. Okay, great. So the other thing I think is that a challenge that we grapple with as researchers is how to make co-production and PPI work truly kind of meaningful in the limited resources we have. So I'm aware that obviously the Galenos project is part of a massive program grant. You've got a good amount of resources, a good amount of funding, but I'm sure you've faced a challenge too. But in terms of kind of smaller scale projects where we don't have as many resources, and I'm wondering how you would advise us to navigate that challenge of making sure it's not just a box ticking exercise.
I can answer for the UK, for instance. Yeah, it's absolutely right. We need enough funding for this PPI component, and I have to say our range is around 15–20% of the money allocated to these kind of activities. In order to help smaller projects, I think you should leverage resources from existing infrastructure. For instance, the biomedical research centers, another funded program of research from the NIHR, we all have our PPI group, and we invest in infrastructure to help projects. And now, finally, we managed to overcome this, how can I say, limited perspective of Oxford, Cambridge, Newcastle is more across the UK, internationally, the four devolved nation, and internationally. So I'm very happy to help as much as I can in terms of facilitating, especially for young researchers, the opportunity to liaise with PPIs, and they are paid by the institution in order to do this kind of help. The other thing I can say, it's important to recognize the time and commitment of people with lived experience in terms of also remuneration, but I can tell you they always go the extra mile because they are driven by real interests. So very often they do things without any payment because they really believe in the project and the science we do.
I think just to add to that as well, it's beyond remuneration needs to be there, but also it's thinking about the other ways that you recognise their support. So, for example, the papers that we produce have lived experience experts named as the authors, and they're very involved in that process. So again, whilst the remuneration is really important, you need to think of those other things beyond that that recognises and shows off their contribution essentially within that project. Building on what Andrea was saying, I think again, what we're hoping with Galanos as well is we can build a bank of trained experts by lived experience to then be able to be part of these different projects, because that's part of the costliest part, is how do you help support these people, train them up on a global perspective to then be able to be part of smaller projects that perhaps don't have the funding to put that infrastructure in place. Tate, I don't know if you've got anything else to add in terms of that for those smaller projects, if you've been involved in any yourself.
Yeah, I think I would like to say that maybe, if it does seem impossible in terms of resources limited, I think it's also important to just be transparent about that as well. It's something that we have seen really helping in terms of then understanding how we can actually contribute and just having that recognition. So, I think at the beginning of the project, and Andrea knows this, we really did have a lot of conversations and discussions around this about remuneration, payments, and things like that. But we were very transparent, about what's happening, about the budgets, about things like that. And I think that really helped in terms of having everyone on board and feeling like, okay, so this is what's happening in the project, this is where I'm contributing, and this is how I'm being recognized. And I think that, that could be helpful as well, if you'd like to navigate that manner.
Brilliant, thank you, Tate. So there was someone waving with a phone in their hand this time.
Hello.
Oh, you've got a microphone, please,
Yes.
go ahead.
Hi, so I've got a couple of questions, perhaps about the process itself. So when it comes to building this systematic reviews and building this evidence, so you mentioned, and we heard yesterday as well from Georgia about this process of triangulation between animal data and human data. I'm so curious if you could expand on that. I would have assumed that if there's clinical trial data, that would trump, the sort of more preclinical animal model data. And I say that because, we already know that in sort of rodent, animal model studies, there's a lot of there's positive publication bias, right? Whereas, when it comes to clinical trial, it may not translate. So how does that feature, say, if you have a study that has, negative human trial results, but perhaps 20, 30 papers that support a positive effect in animal studies, how do you square that?
Could I, before you start, could I ask you, if you've got your other questions, would you mind saying them now, and then we could take them around, just because we are slowly or very quickly running out of time as well.
The second point that I had was about one of the comments about sort of using machine learning and AI to identify trends in to prioritize funding. I guess as I was hearing that, the concern that I had was whether that exacerbates this problem we had in prioritizing funding, where we are sort of funding more trendy science, if that makes sense, but maybe not funding things that are maybe less trendy at the point in time, but may nevertheless be fruitful. How do you get over that, I suppose?
Thank you very much. I think, Andrea, these are ones square for you.
Yeah, so the first question about the triangulation, I can give you an example. So you're absolutely right. It's not only the problem of the publication bias, which is a nightmare for animal studies, it's also for psychiatry, the models of depression, or if you want, the example I wanted to give you is about the anhedonia paper that the Anhedonia Living Systematic Review, and the paper is under review now, hopefully out soon. It's not only the model of depression, it's also the sucrose test in order to test anhedonia in rats or mice is not as anhedonia in humans. So I take all this into account. But the anhedonia is a great example where we had this huge amount of data favoring the dopaminergic pathway to treat anhedonia in people with depression, supported by animal studies. The moment we look at the human data this was mixed. And this was really helpful in the triangulation meeting that we had last year to understand better the pathway and actually looking deeper in the results. And what we did was to go a level, if you want, deeper or higher, depending on the perspective, and moving from average aggregate data into individual patient data. We disentangled the antidepressant effect versus the specific anti-anhedonia effect. And we identified that there are possibly other mechanisms involved. So that's, I can see your point, I totally agree. That's the richness of combining the two data. And we don't initiate the discussion with a priori RCTs are top necessarily. Another example about the triangulation is we are looking at the effect of circadian disruption on mood. And of course, this is a very difficult topic. We had to invent the pre-triangulation meeting in order to disentangle all the subtleties of the problem. But when we look at this circadian disruption, we open the door to all the family study, twin studies, genetic study, Mendelian randomization study. How do they fit with the RCTs that may be testing a circadian disruption mechanism? So all this is part of the process. And the other thing is, we learn as we do, and we are now about to publish 3 papers around triangulation just to show how complex is this. And that's the advertising part. You're more than welcome to join the discussion if you're interested in the topic. In terms of the trendy topics, this is mainly because our mission is living systematic reviews. So the idea is to identify important questions that over time will produce new data, because the living mode means new data feeding the system. But I agree with you, trendy topic is not only what is the trendy thing on journals, it's always filtered and actually often started by people who lived experience. An example was, we suggested, if you remember, Tate, we suggested psychedelics in depression because it was a very important thing coming to the clinic, a new-ish mechanism of action, a lot of buzz around this, but Tate and her team said no, because we don't have psychedelics in Africa, so it's not a priority for us, and now is stopped for this reason.
Yeah, Tate, I don't know if you want to add anything to that. Again, there's that interesting crossover of where lived experience can play such an important role rather than relying solely on the kind of AI side of things and the trendy topics.
Yeah, I think it's one of the great things about the project, and that we don't just at producing knowledge, but there's this awareness that evidence that is used matters just as much as what it says. So from the beginning, there's commitment of asking who is this for, what population do we aim to address, who needs to understand this evidence to actually make a difference, So sometimes we may come up with research questions that are detached from real-world settings or from certain populations and certain contexts, but just having that involvement brings us back to keeping the end users and their needs at the center of what we are trying to achieve and what we're trying to do.
Brilliant, thank you. So I think, unfortunately, we've come to the end of our time. Tate or Andrea, if there's anything else you want to say as a last 10-second thing to leave with the audience?
I leave Tate too.
Tate, anything from you?
Yeah, I think I want to speak a bit about power sharing and trust and things like that. I think just to emphasize what I mentioned earlier about building relationships and things like that. I think one of the learnings that I have really gathered from the project, in terms of having researchers actually pausing to reflect on something uncomfortable that is raised. And this is something that we've seen continuously throughout the project. So there are instances where we have lived experience advisors feeling like they're not having a lot of meaningful contribution, or they feel they can contribute even more to the work that we're doing. But we have had, it hasn't been brushed off, hasn't been over-intellectualized or things like that. But just having that space to actually be able to name that discomfort and to name that issue has been very helpful for us as PPI being involved in this project. So yeah, I think that for anyone, for any researchers who have such a complex project and having lived experience being embedded into that, it is important for you to be able to name that discomfort, that issue. It's not something that will disrupt the way you work around things, but it actually help you to move forward and come up with a way that really addresses some of these issues and, yeah, having meaningful contribution from PPL. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Tate. I think you have summarised that fantastically, and hopefully you'll take away from today that idea of we haven't solved everything. We've put the structures in place to enable us to learn, but we're also acknowledging there are so much complexities around this area. There is discomfort in this area, but therefore you have those open conversations and you work out how to move through those and are ready for them the next time that they appear. So hopefully you'll take that away, and next time you experience some of that discomfort, know that that's probably a good thing that you are seeing that and you're in the right place and you're pushing that ground forward. So thank you so, so much, Tate, for joining us online, and obviously Andrea for being here, and welcome again for allowing this to happen today, and of course the conference and the BNA themselves as well. But thank you so much.
Thank you.